Welcome. Hello and welcome to all of you who have joined us for today's Universal Peace Federation webinar. The Universal Peace Federation, or UPF, is an international and an interreligious network of individuals and organizations that is dedicated to achieving world peace. UPF is an NGO in general consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and it supports the work of the United Nations, especially in the areas of interfaith peace building, peace education, and the strengthening of marriage and family. Today's webinar is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, one of the associations of the Universal Peace Federation, in collaboration with UPF Canada, whose president is one of our respondents today. Our topic today is the future of religious freedom in Northeast Asia, and our moderator is Pierre Beauregard, coordinator for UPF Canada. Welcome, Pierre.
Thank you very much, Peggy. And thank you all for participating in this time where everyone is preparing to receive family, and it's a busy time. So your presence here shows how important is religious freedom, how much you care about it. Even in Canada, where our Charter of Rights and Freedom recognizes the supremacy of God and guarantees freedom of conscience and religion, recent developments causes many to worry that these guarantees are being challenged. Our focus today is the future for religious freedom in Northeast Asia. We know that the CCP in China persecutes Muslim minorities, Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetan Buddhists, and Christians. South Korea, however, is a country which enjoys a strong reputation for religious freedom, supported by constitutional guarantees and a vibrant religious landscape. Yet, recent controversies highlight the tensions between state authority, majority religious groups, and minority faiths, suggesting challenges remain in fully upholding these freedoms in practice. Our main speaker today, Dr. Massimo Introvigne, founder of the Center for Studies on New Religions, known as CESNUR, and our two respondents, Dr. Famularo, president of Universal Peace Federation Canada, and Mr. Isaac Jeong, co-founder of Jeong Media, will examine the rise of politically motivated persecution of religions under South Korea's current government and analyze the implication of recent raids on churches, as well as the arrest of pastors and key opposition leaders. We, of course, are thinking of Pastor Sung Hyun Bo and Dr. Hak Jahan, presently in detention. Our varied expert panel will help us better understand the situation and offer answers to the question, how should the international community and media respond to address the fears of a potential slide towards dictatorship? Let me introduce our first speaker. Massimo Introvigne is an Italian sociologist of religions. He is a founder and managing director of the Center for Studies of New Religions, an international network of scholars who study new religious movements. Dr. Introvigne is the author of some 70 books and more than 100 articles in the field of sociology of religion. He is the main author of Encyclopedia delle religioni in Italia. He is a member of the editorial board for the Interdisciplinary Journal of Research on Religion and the executive board of the University of Pennsylvania Press Nova Religio. From January 5th to December 31st, 2011, he has served as the representative on combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, with a special focus on discrimination against Christians and members of other religions of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. From 2012 to 2015, he served as chairperson of the Observatory of Religious Liberty instituted by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in order to monitor problems of religious liberty on a worldwide scale. Dr. Massimo Introvigne, welcome. You have the floor. You are muted, Dr. Introvigne.
Thank you. And as it has been said, thanks to those that rather than preparing for the festivities, decided to join us tonight. Sociologists studying new religious movements believed at the end of the past century that they had more or less disposed of the use of the word cult, which has been more or less banned in the academia, even if it continued to be used by tabloids and other media. And also, with the notable exception of France, proposal to institute anti-cult governmental agency or to pass anti-cult laws had been rejected in most countries of the world. But recently, however, we have witnessed an unwelcome revival of anti-cultism, and also another phenomenon, which is the extension of the category of cults to all sorts of conservative religion and even non-religion. There is a book in the United States called The Cult of Trump by a veteran anti-cultist. And we see, for example, and the magazine I edit, Bitter Winter, and the academic journal I edit, the Journal of CESNUR, are devoting considerable attention to an inquiry into cults by the Parliament of Victoria in Australia, where we see precisely this phenomenon that large, conservative, pro-life, anti-communist, evangelical churches are also branded as cults, which is something which would not have happened 20 years ago. But in Korea and in Japan, the campaigns against cults are somewhat different from what happens in Europe, in North America, in Australia, New Zealand, and increasingly in Africa. And this specificity of Japan and Korea is a very strange, but in a way effective alliance between some fundamentalist Protestant opponents of the so-called cults and left-wing, often Marxist intellectuals and politicians. Now, these two groups disagree on almost everything: the sanctity of life, family, socialism, but based on the old principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They cooperate against some groups labeled as cults. So it's a very strange, unholy alliance, which gives a special flavor to anti-cultism in these countries. And as we will see, this alliance is not entirely spontaneous, but it's also, at least from a certain point of time, the fruit of deliberate efforts and strategies by the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party, which is in a way the organizer of this bizarre alliance. Now, in China, the idea that religious groups not controlled by the state and that think independently are dangerous, threaten the state, threaten social harmony, and should be annihilated and eradicated is a very old idea. In China, there is a category of Xie which exists since the Middle Ages, actually the 7th and 8th century of the Christian era. And Xie is often mistranslated, including by the Chinese government itself, as evil cults or cults. But that's totally anachronistic, given the origin of the word in the Chinese Middle Ages. Xie Zhao means organization spreading, Xie twisted, but it really means heterodox teachings. And what teachings are heterodox is determined by the state. So this notion, which was originally used by the Taoists against the Buddhists of Xie Zhao, traveled from imperial China to nationalist China to Taiwan during the martial law era and to the People's Republic of China. The PRC, Communist China, has a specific article of the Criminal Code, Article 300, making being active in any capacity in a Xie Zhao crime, which is punished with penalties going from a couple of years in jail to imprisonment for life. There is an official list of Xie Zhao, which includes the Family Federation or Unification Church, and based on this, some members from Taiwan have been arrested in China this year. But we see the same phenomenon as in democratic countries, that increasingly Xie Zhao and Article 300 are used against groups one will not normally call cults, particularly independent Christian churches, whose only sin is to be critical of the Communist Party and not willing to join the government-controlled umbrella organizations for Christianity set up by the regime. So there is this machinery against the non-conformist, non-controlled forms of religion, which in the sinosphere, in the world culturally related to China, is really millennia old. Now, Japan is also relevant for Korea. In Japan, there is a general post-World War II hostility to religion. It's become a dominant element of Chinese culture and movies and newspapers, that all forms of clergy are greedy, and that the religions influence the government in fueling nationalism, militarism, and the disaster of World War II. But if there is this background of hostility to religion in Japan, there is also a specific hostility by Christian Protestant fundamentalist ministers to some new religions. And the practice of deprogramming, which means kidnapping adult members of groups stigmatized as cults, secluding or confining them somewhere, and persuading more or less violently them to leave their faith. This practice originated in the United States, but was imported into Japan by Protestant ministers and pastors, and particularly targeted the Unification Church. The pastor deprogrammers were in a limited number of cases liberal, but in most cases they were fundamentalist. And in Japan was born this very strange, unnatural alliance between these fundamentalist pastors who doubled as deprogrammers and some left-wing lawyers that since the 1980s had founded organizations targeting the Unification Church because they were left-leaning, and Unification Church, through the International Federation for Victory over Communism, been very successful in conducting anti-communist campaign and supporting anti-communist politicians in the election. So we see before Korea, in Japan, this strange cooperation between people with very different ideas on other issues, fundamentalist pastor deprogrammers and left-leaning lawyers and politicians, including the powerful Japanese Communist Party, which played a leading role in the opposition to the Unification Church. Now, this cooperation was even more spectacular in Korea, because in Korea, to start with, Christianity is more important than in Japan. You should consider that only between 1 and 2% of the Japanese are Protestant, but 25% of the Koreans are Protestant. So the numbers are totally different. And in Korea, the Protestant bloc is very important as a voting bloc in the election. For reasons I have no time to discuss, but I have discussed in some articles, in Korea, Protestantism was dominated by fundamentalism. And Korean fundamentalism had one obsession, and this obsession was to purify Korean Protestantism from elements they saw as relics of Korean traditional religions, not only Confucianism and Buddhism, but from the point of view of the Protestant fundamentalists, more dramatically shamanism, because shamanism was perceived by fundamentalists as satanic or demonic. So the history of Korean fundamentalist churches is largely a history of excommunication, heresy, hunts, and purges, where people were continuously expelled because they were suspected of keeping relics of traditional non-Christian Korean religions in their theology and practicing. And by the 1950s, the fundamentalists had asserted successfully their hegemony on Korean Protestantism, but they were confronted with a problem they had not completely seen coming, and that's the emergence of new religious movements of Christian origins, and two in particular emerged in the 1950s, were very successful in different reasons. One was the olive tree, and the one was the Unification church. And that explains why by the end of the 1950s, Korean fundamentalist pastors had already established the first anti-cult campaigns and organizations targeting the olive tree and the Unification Church. And they, after a few years, they might claim they had destroyed the olive tree, reduced it to a very small church from the 2 million member one it was, even if most members of the olive tree didn't really get back to the fundamentalist fold. They joined newly established new religions, later principally Shincheonji. But they were not successful with the Unification Church. The Unification Church resisted, even if they created a bad press about it. And also they found new religions. Again, they had not predicted them, including perhaps the largest one among Christians, which is a schism of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, called the War Mission Society Church of God, sometimes called by Korean Ansangong, but that's a mistaken name, because the followers of the preacher called Ansangong are actually a different church. The War Mission Society Church of God is a schism of the organization founded by Ansangong, but a big one, 2 million members. Now, the Korean Christian anti-cultists, they decided that their best bet to destroy their enemies was to forge alliances with the political power that be, which were originally some of the right-wing dictators, but later were leftist intellectual and parties, which particularly didn't like the Unification Church because of its political anti-communist ideas. So as I say, the Christian anti-cult movement had existed in Korea since the late 1950s, but it became politically active and structured later in the 1990s, particularly in the 1998, when something called the Christian Heresy Research Council was founded, which was later renamed the Christian Heresy Countermeasures Association. It became very active, including among the Korean diaspora abroad. Now, one of the first things these organizations did was to go to Japan to learn the practice of deprogramming from the pastor deprogrammers in Japan, and they imported the deprogramming into Korea. But there was an important difference, that in Japan, the #1 target of deprogramming was the Unification Church. But by the time deprogramming was imported into Korea, most young adult members of the Unification Church were second generation. So their parents were members of the church. They wouldn't hire a deprogrammer, of course. So in Korea, unlike Japan, there were almost 0 cases of deprogramming of members of Unification Church, but there were some 5,000 instances of deprogramming of members of other groups, Shincheonji, the church called the Providence or Christian Gospel Mission, the War Mission Society, Church of God. And it was a very rough affair. There were no casualties in Japan, but in Korea, at least 2 people and perhaps 4 were killed during deprogramming, including in the case of Miss Gu Jin, a member of Shincheonji who was killed by her father in 2018 during a deprogramming session. That led to one of the biggest street demonstrations in the history of Seoul, and also to protest by the US State Department and USCRF. But notwithstanding this, unlike in Japan, Korean courts are still very reluctant to say that deprogramming in general is illegal. Although some particularly rough deprogrammers, such as Pastor Jeong-sik, were sentenced to jail terms in specific cases, which did not prevent Pastor Jin to remain very active in the anti-cult activity. Coming to my conclusions, the main development in the 21st century was the open cooperation of Korean Christian anti-cultists with the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese public security. Since the beginning of the 20th century, there were conferences putting together Chinese Communist Party bureaucrats and Korean Christian anti-cultists, strange bedfellows indeed. And in 2013, an association called World Association Against Heresy, headquartered in Seoul, was founded with a branch in Australia. Pastor Jeong-sik, I have already mentioned it, deprogrammer and ex-con, serves until this day as president of this association, which receives financial support from China and has organized conferences against Korean cults, such as the Unification Church and Shincheonji all over the world, including in Europe. There are three reasons China is keenly interested in what's going on in Korea. The first is some Korean groups are active underground in China, including the Unification Church. I mentioned in the arrest of 2025, but others too. The second is some Korean groups, particularly the Unification Church, have anti-communist and anti-China political ideas. And the third, and perhaps more important, is Chinese can go to Korea through Jeju Island without a visa. And that has been consistently used by members of the two most persecuted groups in China, Falun Gong and the Church of Almighty God, to escape to Korea and seek asylum there, not only seek asylum, but give interviews about the horrors of Chinese jail. Now, it's part of the bargain, that's very important, between the Chinese Communist Party and the Korean anti-cultists, that the latter take to the street and demonstrate against Chinese refugees of Falun Gong and Church of Almighty God, asking that they be sent back to China. Now, Falun Gong is a non-Christian group. Church of Almighty God is a religion of Chinese refugees in Korea with only a handful of Korean members. So they are no competitors of the Christian anti-cultists. And the only reason Christian anti-cultists devote considerable resources to fighting them is because of their alliance with China. And they want to do a favor to China, and China finances and supports them elsewhere. I really conclude. I know my time is almost off with two recent developments. First, the Abe assassination in Japan. That offered an opportunity to revamp the fight against the Unification Church in Korea, and we are aware of at least 4 meetings One of them kept very much secret, which happened in Korea, with 3 sets of participants. The Korean World Anti-Heresy Association, the Japanese anti-cult lawyers of the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales, and bureaucrats from China. From both the China Anti-Sejao Association, which is a branch of the United Front, but also from police and public security. And in this meeting, they discuss how can we use the Abe assassination in Japan to fight the Family Federation, Aka Unification Church in Korea. The second development, which is a mixed blessing, and I will explain why, is the downfall of President Yoon and his arrest and the election of President Lee, because that offered to this trio, the Korean traditional anti-cultist, the Chinese Communist Party's anti-cult branch, and the Japanese lawyers, a golden opportunity to translate their attack against the Family Federation and some other groups like Shincheonji into decisive political action. But it also created problems because it became clear that President Lee was not happy to just fighting the so-called cults like the Unification Church and Shincheonji, but he created a machine to go against all forms of religion that had supported the PPP, the right-wing party, in the election that he won by a very narrow margin. So, of course, Mother Han of the Unification Church, Family Federation, was put in jail. Of course, Shincheonji was raided. But at the same time, Pastor Son of the Segero Church was also put in jail. Yoido Full Gospel Church, the largest church in Korea, was raided. Dr. Billy Kim's Baptist Church and broadcast TV station were raided. Now, it is important to reflect on one point, that Pastor Son was personally, thank goodness, very moderate on this issue, but Pastor Son is a Presbyterian, and the deprogrammers and the worst anti-cultists in Korea are Presbyterian. Yoido Full Gospel Church prints anti-cult material. Dr. Billy Kim's broadcaster offers a platform to do propaganda for anti-cultism and even for deprogramming. So even people who were part of the anti-cult movement, but were not supporting, for instance, the pro-LGBTQ agenda or pro-China agenda or President Lee, were caught in this political crackdown. So perhaps this unholy alliance between conservative Christian pastors and left-wing politicians based on the idea the enemy of my enemy is my friend is now in crisis. Because President Lee is putting in jail both the so-called cultists and the conservative Christians, who are sometimes anti-cult themselves. So this unholy alliance, which lasted for decades, perhaps will come to an end, or perhaps not. But we don't know, but it is paradoxically in a moment of crisis, because of President Lee's crackdown on all sorts of conservative religion, including the one which has supported traditionally the anti-cult campaign. So it's a very interesting and dramatic moment in Korea, but so the future will tell us, but all this story I told you today at least is proving something which is obvious, I believe, to our Korean friend, but a little bit less obvious internationally or to the foreign media, that the cruel and unjust and scandalous and obnoxious persecution of Mother Han is not about handbags or necklaces, but it is really about politics and the will to destroy churches and religious organizations that are perceived as politically not controllable by the powers that be, and in particularly by the present socialist pro-Chinese government of President Xi. Thank you, and we may perhaps later have a discussion about some of these points.
Thank you, Dr. Introvigne. We appreciate especially the silver lining at the end. We hope that this cabal, this association between Christians and anti-cultists will indeed, as you paint that possibility, come to somehow to an end. That is our deepest wish. And now I'm going to introduce our first respondent. We're looking towards their what Dr. Franco Famularo can add to this discussion after your presentation. Dr. Famularo is the president of the Universal Peace Federation of Canada. He also serves as chair of the board of trustees of HJ International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership in New York City, where he earned his doctorate in ministry. With a strong interest in religious history, interfaith dialogue, and peace activism, he has served with the Unification Community for over 50 years in Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, Korea, Russia, and the USA. So, Dr. Famularo, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Pierre. It's very good to be here. Thank you, Dr. Introvigne, for your presentation, which was quite comprehensive. And I know from working with you on the Japan issue, it is complex. There's so many things I'd like to say, but I put my stopwatch on because I'll limit myself to the time prescribed so that we can have some Q&A and discussion later. You know, obviously, the issue of religious freedom and the attack on religion is not something limited to Northeast Asia. It's happening globally. And as Massimo mentioned, this has been going on for decades. And one could dig into history and find that, you know, at the time of the French Revolution, which is over 200 years ago, there was a very serious attack on religion. We could go back to the time of the Roman Empire when emperors like Diocletian ordered a systematic destruction of Christianity just before it was recognized as a legal religion. We're talking destruction of churches, we're talking execution of bishops and priests, we're talking confiscation of scripture and the destruction of libraries and more. And yes, 10 years later, Christianity became a legal religion in the Roman Empire, and maybe a few decades later, in the late 3rd, 4th century, we have the establishment of Christianity as the state religion, which in some cases became just as brutal toward those that did not practice. So the attack on religion is not limited to Northeast Asia, but we have a very important component there in the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, which sees religion as a threat and will only accept religions that are under its control or supervision. There really is no freedom of religion, although it is considered in the Constitution that Chinese people have the freedom of religion as long as they obey the rules that put religion under the supervision and control of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, having said that, we have heard from Massimo about the issue of cults. Of course, there are many cults. All religions are considered cults. I've heard Protestants call the Catholic Church a cult. I've heard people that voted for Donald Trump are members of a large American cult. And this word is bandied around now as though it applies to a lot of people. But let me just say that, we have come a long way. I remember growing up in Montreal, it was not uncommon to make fun of different ethnic groups, to criticize Black people for being Black, and for Chinese for being Chinese, and for Asians to be, or Jews. And we had very little tolerance 50, 60 years ago when I grew up. But things have changed, and we have become more tolerant, more accepting of people of different religions. There is a great deal of sensitivity expressed in Western democracies about Islam. We are against Islamophobia. We are against anti-Semitism. We don't subscribe to such views. But however, you find that it's okay to criticize new religious movements and call them cults. Calling a member of a new religious movement is not a big deal, and the media gets away with it all the time. And in English, we use the word cult. In French and Spanish, in Italian and German, they use the word sect or secta or sect, etc. But it basically comes to the same thing. Now, the anti-religious efforts in Asia are quite surprising when you consider that these are also countries that have enshrined in their constitutions the freedom of religion. The Chinese Communist Party definitely has an anti-religious streak, but we would not expect that in a liberal democracy like Japan or even in Korea. But the caveat is that these countries have a very, very recent experience with democracy. Japan adapted some of the constitutional elements from the West, and I have often heard from the Japanese saying, well, it's not really our constitution. Let's not forget that maybe 50 to 60% of the population in Japan does not identify with religion. And Christianity is a very, very small component, no more than 1.5% of the population. So this is a very small component. Maybe there are 400,000 to 500,000 Roman Catholics. There may be more Protestants, but this is an issue. And we're dealing with the Korean element that is also not a very mature democracy. It did not really have a democratic rule until 1987, if I'm not mistaken. And some of us are a little older than that, and we can remember when Korea was not a democracy, when it was a dictatorship led by military rulers. Now, the issue in Japan goes back against the Unification Church, the Family Federation. It goes back to the time of the Kyoto election in 1978. although the Family Federation was doing a lot of work in educating the population about the dangers of atheistic, materialistic Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, it did not become an issue until some of the members of the Family Federation campaigned against the election of the communist governor or so of Kyoto in 1978. And he had held that seat in the Diet for something like 28 years. And this was the stimulus for having created this lawyers group that is attacking in collusion with the fundamentalist Christians in Japan of the Family Federation members. So I know my time is up. There's a lot more to say, but the attacks on religion are ongoing, and we need to be vigilant. We need to keep fighting the battle, and we need to collaborate. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the Q&A session and the presentation by our colleague Isaac Jeong. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Famularo. So your point of view as a historian of religion is very interesting. And indeed, we are in the midst of a new history that is being written. And we look forward now to our second respondent, Isaac Jeong. He's a second-generation member of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, living in Korea now for 3 years. And he's co-founder with, I believe, with his brother, Josh, if I'm right, of Jeong Media, a video marketing agency, along with a group of other second and even third-generation members. He initiated the Monarch Report, which I'm sure many people here are following, to advocate religious freedom of religion and freedom of speech, while also serving as a platform to testify to the great works of Reverend Sun Myung Moon and Dr. Hak Jahan to the whole world. He takes inspiration from his parents, who devoted their lives as missionaries in Europe before moving to America. Isaac, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to be here. I'm definitely no historian or a socialist. That is not my profession, as Mr. Pierre has shared more from a media background. But I really want to say thank you to Dr. Introvigne for sharing your message today. It makes sense. It starts to kind of connect the dots for me as well. I guess I want to start with more of a personal sharing. I was actually there when the raiding happened at the Cheongguk, because I was just part of volunteer staff filming the workshop that was happening. And there was a lot of buses, lots of police buses, lots of cameras, and that was kind of the start of me seeing how the Korean media portrays our church without really understanding where we come from, understanding the facts, without telling the truth. So particularly for that particular moment, how they framed the situation was that there was a big workshop going on at the time with many second and third generation, over 600 of them. And we would go every morning to Cheongguk at the gate to offer prayer, praise. That was kind of part of the program. But how the media presented is that we were there to protest or to try to block the police and to justify why they sent, over 1,000 policemen to that location, which was far from the truth. We had no intentions of doing that. And maybe perhaps you have seen videos from that particular incident where we're just truly just praying for our Holy Mother Han. And then that kind of initiated my, efforts to try to share my point of view and share the truth that I know to be true, which is kind of what I've shared already. But while I was digging into, some of the facts, which would not have been possible without the age of AI that we live in right now. I think with AI, we live closer to the spirit world because, everything is a lot closer to us in terms of finding the truth, as long as you use the right AI sources. But what I came to find was that JTBC, one of the media channels that are super aggressive in framing the Unification Church in a very bad way, was at one point funded by a Chinese company. And so that starts to make sense why a lot of their news are pro-China, pro-communism, and anti-communist groups like our church. And so that's when we started to think about, okay, what can we do with our capabilities and with our resources to offer something to help our true parents, true mothers in particular. And, that's kind of how we started the Monarch Report, to share the truth. Because what's very obvious at this point is that the media in Korea is very one-sided. Everything is pretty much, at this point, anti-martial law, anti-Yoon. A lot of the messaging is framed that way. And to the point that recently a lot of the Western media picked up on that and shared it as, President Yoon planned the martial law for over a year, which was far from the truth. And why I discuss this is because, it kind of ties in with the freedom of religion, which is the core of democracy. And that ties in with freedom of speech. And if there's censorship and if there's things being, held back, but being pushed in a certain way, in a certain frame that would allow the world to see Korea in a different way, far from the democratic nation that it is, then, it becomes a problem. And so, our efforts have been to share as much as we can with our capabilities of what we know to be closer to the truth of what's happening in Korea. And it's sad, like in a recent case where there was an online protest where young children, like elementary, middle school, high school students, got together on a game called Roblox to kind of share their expression of what's happening in Korea. Of course, it was a pro-Yoon movement, but the NBC News reported as a hateful, a dangerous type of act in the nation, and it's just kids expressing their own opinion. So those are some of the examples where we can see that democracy is truly in danger, and the media is truly not helping that situation. And a lot of our efforts have been to try to tell the West what's happening in Korea, to try to decipher what's happening with the court cases with Mother Han and other related court cases, as well as some of the bills and policies that are being encouraged and pushed by the current government, which are very much pro-communist, pro-China, and very anti-religion. So that has been my experience. Hopefully that kind of adds to the conversation that Dr. Introvigne shared with us today, and that has been our primary effort. And it's been a learning process, as well as a difficult process, because it's so close to our personal relationship with Holy Mother Han, our true mother. But at the end, we see the true importance of doing something like this in a time like this. Especially if we look at America, we see that individual journalism has been more rampant. And as an American, when I look at America in the past few years, I see Korea is kind of following the same pattern in terms of like the world of media. Just a few years back. So we could already foresee kind of how things would play out if people didn't speak out, more strongly about the injustice and all of the things that are happening in Korea. So I think that is all I have to share on my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. Yes, you are a media person, and I just posted your YouTube channel, Monarch Report, I'm sure many people here would like to see more of what you were sharing. And Dr. Introvigne, someone asked if your content of today will be shared on Bitter Winter, on an upcoming article, perhaps, or is it already existing? Maybe that's a simple answer for you, Dr. Introvigne.
Yeah, there are many articles about Korea, including a series of 4 articles we published in Winter, but that's, in a way, it's a new presentation, so we may discuss in the next few days whether
Yeah.
interest in publishing it, but there is nothing completely new, but different articles have been put together.
Thank you. So we don't have a lot of time for question and answer. I'll ask one question and I'll ask you each to try to take a stab at it. And you may respond to one another if you choose so. Feel free. So the question is the following. There's a fine line between freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and publicly expressing one's political views and alliances. How is this contributing to religious persecution in Northeast Asia? Who wants to try?
If I want a short comment, I believe that what we are seeing in Korea and to some extent in Japan is radical secularism that doesn't even exist in France. And the idea that religious organization should not be free to make any comment which may have an electoral influence. The prosecution and detention of Pastor Son Yongmo is only about this. In a long sermon where he talked about other things, he is accused of having made comments favoring in a local election one candidate over another. And this is the reason he is in a very small jail cell in bad health and kept there for months. So there is a law that clergy should not do electoral propaganda in Korea, but in the past, clergy did. They were like fined $200, but now people are put in jail. And we saw the same in Japan with the Liberal Democrat Party taking very radical measures. We should not, in any way, our members should not be seen anywhere near a Unification Church or UPF event. Now, that's is not what democracy is all about, because all group of citizens, be they hunters or football fans or members of a religion, should be allowed to participate in politics, both individually and as a group. And of course, in the history of European democracies such as Germany and Italy, we saw the crucial importance in the past in Germany to this very day of Christian Democrat parties who have a very close connection with some churches and religious organizations. And in United States, by settling a case, the Internal Revenue Service just reversed an old policy and said that religious groups who take a political stand in election do not lose their tax-exempt status. So in other democracies, it's a given that believers can participate in politics as believers and even in a corporate way, not only as individuals. But it seems that Korea and after the Abe assassination, Japan have a different attitude, even if it seems in Korea it's applied selectively. because there are quite a few liberal Catholic priests who supported the campaign of President E, and they have not heard they have been put in jail. But those pastors who criticized the President E before he became president are put in jail. So it seems the application of these laws is a little bit selectively. But I believe the position of friends of freedom of religion or belief is believers should be free as believers to express political opinion and to participate in politics. And to limit this opens a floodgate of prosecution of pastors and priests and other clergy who just happen to support the wrong political party or the party losing the elections.
Thank you. Dr. Famularo, you want to add something?
Yes, I think that what we're witnessing here is a very systematic effort to change laws. For example, in Japan, dissolution of a religious organization could only be implemented if there had been criminal activity, and through pressure, they changed that to anything that disturbs the social order or whatever it is that they use as the expression there. And in Korea, again, there is religious freedom enshrined in the Constitution, but what they're doing right now is they're attacking those groups that basically they don't like. And they're saying, well, you're really not free to oppose the government that's in power right now because it offends us. So they make reasons for them to be shut down. And this is what happened to the Seguro Church. He is a moderate, as the Dr. Introvigne mentioned, but they're still going after them. But they're selective. If I'm not mistaken, there are some groups that have not been touched by this at all.
Thank you. Isaac.
I guess one thing I can just add to the conversation is that my understanding of democracy, it was built on top of religious freedom. Like religious freedom is a big component to democracy. An election is also a big component of democracy. And if we're limiting speech for those who have a religious background or coming from a religious standpoint on our opinion of how perhaps the country should be run or how certain policies don't make sense, I think that becomes a dangerous thing. Also, for many people, religion is a source for our moral grounds, how we make decisions on what is right and what is wrong. And if that is being completely removed for the sake of protecting democracy, which is questionable, I think that's something that many people should reconsider if they believe that to be true.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the top of the hour. We won't have time for any more questions, unfortunately. I will just ask to give some final statement, final remarks. Maybe in your final remarks, you might want to touch upon perhaps the question of how the international community and the media can respond, or you may choose something else to focus on in your final remarks. I'd like to start with Dr. Massimo Introvigne.
Yeah, I believe the final remark here should be that international community should help Korea to immediately and unconditionally release Mother Han and Pastor Son, because there are international rules, the so-called Mandela rules of the United Nations on pre-trial detention. And it is clear that these people will not escape. I don't see Mother Han to leave Korea on her wheelchair without a passport and with heart condition pursued by the police. That's just a ridiculous scene. And Pastor Son has indicated he has no intention of leaving Korea in any way. And also the idea that if liberated, they can tamper with evidence is also ridiculous, because their churches are raided every day. They keep raiding. I believe they have now removed even grains of dust from the residences of Mother Han and Pastor Son and their churches. And there is surely nothing else, not additional evidence to be seized or confiscated. So these are the reasons to keep people in jail. Keeping people in jail, pre-detention, the international law is very clear. It cannot be a form of punishment. It cannot be a psychological pressure to induce them to confess perhaps crimes they have never committed. It cannot be a political sideshow showing that some groups are not tolerated by the political party in power. Now, these international rules about pre-detention have been violated now for months and kept being violated in the case of Mother Han and in the case of Pastor Son. So irrespective of what the trial, when it will be celebrated, can give, the pre-detention of Mother Han and Pastor Son is illegal. Is also immoral and cruel, but it's surely illegal under international obligation Korea signed and ratified. And so the international community should ask Korea to immediately free Dr. Han, Mother Han, and Pastor Son. And it should have happened for Christmas. They should have been allowed to celebrate Christmas with their families. It is a shame it has not happened, but we should keep this pressure, and it's perhaps not too late, if not for Christmas, for the New Year, because even putting between brackets that the accusations are overstated and ridiculous, the pre-detention is illegal and should immediately stop.
Thank you so much. We take those words to heart, and we certainly want to see that kind of outcome. Isaac, please, your closing statement.
I think we live in an age where we have individually more power in terms of speaking out, especially with the power of AI, with the power of social media, and the way that algorithms work now. So I would encourage anyone here or anyone beyond to, if you feel that there's a need to speak out, you have more power than we did even 10 years ago of reaching more people and telling the truth and sharing the truth of what's really happening in this world and sharing your own opinion. I think that's a lot of that is super important because if we don't speak out, if we don't tell the truth, then who will? Because certainly the media is not portraying that in a positive light.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. Famularo, you have the final statement.
Thank you. Of course, this effort by the detractors and opponents of religious freedom is clouded in, it looks like it's all about political machination. There are definitely legitimate concerns, and the legal actions stem from complex political investigations and ongoing constitutional turmoil. It looks like that. But let's remind ourselves that the first freedom, the first right, is the right to believe what you want to believe. If you take that away, all other rights and freedoms fall apart. So my concluding remark is, let's continue the fight. Let's do everything we can through many multiple channels through which we can communicate this message. Thank you.
So thank you very much. We had Michael Jenkins, who was here, but unfortunately he must have been called to another meeting. So we would have had a few words from him, but he has left. So that concludes our meeting for this year. So I wish you all a very Merry Christmas with each one of your respective families. And let's all pray that, as Dr. Massimo Introvigne suggested, that it's not too late, that before, if not before Christmas, maybe before the end of the year, that Mother Han and can come home and celebrate with her family. So thank you very much, everyone, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you. Buon Natale, Massimo.
Buon Natale. Thank you. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. Thank you for coming on.
Merry Christmas.
To you too.
Yeah,
Thank you for the great
thank you.
presentation.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Okay, thank you,
Hyvää
everyone.
joulua from Finland.
Okay, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Buon
God
Natale, Merry
bless.
Christmas, Joyeux
Merry
Noël.
Christmas.